In 2014, Amazon launched its first smartphone. It sold tens of thousands of units. Amazon had projected millions. The write-down, $170 million. Jeff Bezos' response to the executive who led the project: "You can't for 1 minute feel bad about the Fire Phone. Promise me you won't lose a minute of sleep." 4 months later, that same executive launched the Amazon Echo. To understand why the Fire Phone failed, you need to understand what Jeff Bezos was actually trying to build. Amazon's internal hardware lab, Lab 126, had been working on the phone for 4 years. Bezos was deeply involved in its development, personally directing features and obsessing over specific details. The centerpiece feature was called Dynamic Perspective. 4 front-facing cameras and infrared sensors tracked the user's head position and adjusted the on-screen display to create a 3-dimensional effect. In theory, it was impressive. In practice, reviewers found it gimmicky and disorienting. Nobody had asked for their phone to detect their head position. Nobody was using the feature within weeks of getting the device. The pricing made it worse. Amazon launched the Fire Phone at $199 on a 2-year ATANT contract, the same price as an iPhone, the phone with fewer apps, a less refined interface, and an ecosystem limited primarily to Amazon's own services. Amazon's own philosophy, "Your margin is my opportunity, lower prices than everyone else," was violated by the Fire Phone's pricing from day one. The device also contradicted Amazon's core identity. Amazon was the everything store for everyone. The Fire Phone was a phone for Amazon Prime members who shopped on Amazon. It was a vertical product from a horizontal company. It served a subset of customers when Amazon's entire DNA was about serving every customer. By September 2015, 14 months after launch, Amazon discontinued the Fire Phone. It had sold an estimated 35,000 units in its first month. Apple sells that many iPhones in about 15 minutes. Most corporate failures produced the same sequence: blame, recrimination, reorganization, and a 2-year period where nobody at the company will admit the product existed. Bezos did something different. Ian Freed, the executive who had led the Fire Phone's development, expected to be fired. Instead, Bezos called him into his office and said, "You can't for 1 minute feel bad about the Fire Phone. Promise me you won't lose a minute of sleep." This was not generosity, it was strategy. Bezos had said publicly, "If you think the Fire Phone is a big failure, we're working on much bigger failures right now." And I'm not kidding. And he had written in Amazon's shareholder letters, "I've made billions of dollars of failures at Amazon, literally billions, and none of those things are fun, but they also don't matter." The philosophy: failure is the cost of attempting things that matter. If your failures are not growing in size as your company grows, you are not attempting things large enough to move the needle. The distinction matters. Celebrating failure for its own sake is waste, but creating a culture where the fear of failure prevents ambitious bets, that is the thing Bezos was actually trying to prevent. Here is the direct line between the Fire Phone and the Amazon Echo. During Fire Phone development, the team had worked on voice recognition technology licensed from a third-party provider. Bezos had been fascinated by it, not for the phone specifically, but for what it suggested about the future of human-computer interaction. The voice software on the Fire Phone was not Amazon's own. Bezos wanted to build proprietary voice recognition, something Amazon owned and controlled. After the Fire Phone launched and it became clear it was failing, Bezos made a decision that would prove transformational. He asked Ian Freed, the same executive he had told not to lose sleep over the Fire Phone, to build a team and develop Amazon's own voice assistant technology. The product they designed was radically different from anything on the market. Not a phone, not a tablet, a cylindrical speaker that sat on a kitchen counter, connected to the internet and responded to voice commands. Always listening, always ready. It was called the Echo. The voice assistant inside it was called Alexa. Amazon launched the Echo in November 2014, 4 months after the Fire Phone went on sale and while the Fire Phone was still being sold. TechCrunch wrote at launch, "Amazon has a new product that doesn't really have any current equivalent from any other tech company." Amazon had invented the smart speaker category. The Echo worked where the Fire Phone failed for reasons that illuminate exactly why the phone was wrong. The Fire Phone competed in a market, smartphones, that already had 2 dominant platforms with massive ecosystems and network effects. iPhone and Android had hundreds of millions of users, millions of apps, and years of developer investment. A third smartphone OS was almost certainly going to fail. The Echo created a market. There was no smart speaker category before the Echo. There was no dominant player to displace. There was no ecosystem to compete with. The phone tried to be better than existing options. The speaker tried to be the first at something new. and the Echo fit Amazon's DNA perfectly. It was not a phone for a specific type of user. It was a device for anyone with an internet connection who wanted to shop, get information, play music, or control their home by speaking. The Fire Phone violated Amazon's core principle. The Echo embodied it. By 2019, Amazon had sold over 100 million Alexa-enabled devices. The Alexa ecosystem had grown to include tens of thousands of third-party skills and integrations. The smart speaker category that Amazon created was worth billions, and Bezos said publicly, "While the Fire Phone was a failure, we were able to take our learnings as well as the development work we'd done to create Echo." The technology that made the Fire Phone gimmicky became the foundation of the product that defined a new category. The Fire Phone story is one of the most instructive in modern business, not because of the failure, but because of what happened immediately after it. Lesson 1. The response to failure matters more than the failure itself. Ian Fried could have spent months in recrimination and career anxiety. His team could have been paralyzed by the public embarrassment of the world's largest retailer failing at something as visible as a smartphone. Bezos' explicit instruction, "Do not feel bad, do not lose sleep," was not comfort. It was a directive to redirect energy. The failure was already done. The only question was what to do next. In any context, business, career, investment, the decision made in the first hours and days after a significant failure determines whether the failure becomes a lesson or an ending. Lesson 2. Know what business you are actually in. Amazon is the everything store for everyone. The Fire Phone was a phone for a specific subset of Amazon's customers. This violated Amazon's fundamental identity, and Bezos recognized it only after the market rejected the product. The Echo was a device for anyone. It lowered the barrier to interacting with Amazon to almost zero. You just spoke. That was Amazon's DNA expressed in hardware. Before launching any product, service, or investment, ask, does this fit who we actually are and who we actually serve? The answer tells you more about the probability of success than any market research. Lesson 3. Category creation beats category competition. Competing in an existing market means fighting entrenched players with established ecosystems. Creating a new market means defining the rules, setting expectations, and building the ecosystem before anyone else arrives. The Fire Phone tried to take share from Apple and Android. The Echo created the smart speaker category and owned it before Google and Apple understood what was happening. This does not mean competition is always wrong, but when choosing between better than existing and, first, at something new, the second path is often both harder and more valuable. Lesson 4. Scale your failures as you scale your ambitions. Bezos' statement, "If the size of your failures isn't growing, you're not going to be inventing at a size that can actually move the needle," is one of the most counterintuitive ideas in business. Most organizations implicitly punish failure by reducing future budgets and limiting future ambitions. The result is a company that makes progressively smaller bets, takes progressively less risk, and eventually stops innovating entirely. The Fire Phone cost Amazon $170 million. The Echo generated billions. If Amazon had responded to the Fire Phone by cutting hardware investment, the Echo would never have been built. Jeff Bezos stepped back from Amazon's day-to-day operations in 2021. He left behind a company with one of the most distinctive cultures in business history, one where failure is not celebrated, but where the fear of failure is actively managed as a threat to innovation. The Fire Phone is barely a footnote in Amazon's history. The Echo reshaped how hundreds of millions of people interact with technology. Bezos once said, "I've made billions of dollars of failures at Amazon, literally billions. And none of those things are fun. But they also don't matter. What matters is the company keeps swinging." The Fire Phone was a swing. It missed. The Echo was the next swing. The lesson is not that failure is good. The lesson is that the willingness to swing again, immediately, with the same people redirecting the same energy, is what separates the companies that build empires from the ones that build monuments to their own caution. Subscribe to Founders and Fortunes. Every week we break down the biggest financial and business stories in history and find the lessons hiding inside them. Next week, how Apple almost went bankrupt in 1997, and the one deal that saved everything. I'll see you there.